The rain is the city's heartbeat, not the frantic, thumping pulse of the midday traffic or the electric throb of the nightlife, but its true, resting rhythm. A slow, steady drip that seeps into the concrete, polishing the streets to a black mirror that reflects a sky the color of a bruise. In a city like Viridia, you learn to listen to the rain. It washes away the grime but never the sins. It's the soundtrack for secrets. My name is Detective Harding. I've been a part of this city's machinery for 22 years, long enough to see idealists rust into cynics and justice become a commodity, traded in backroom deals and whispered courtroom compromises. My office on the 4th floor of the 12th precinct is my sanctuary and my cage. The air is thick with the ghosts of cold coffee and colder cases. Through the blinds, the neon signs across the street bleed their colors into the wet darkness, a smear of electric blue and blood red promises that are never kept. It's a place where the past never really dies, it just gets filed away in a cardboard box in a dusty basement, waiting for a reason to come back and haunt you. My own ghosts are filed there, under a case file from a decade ago marked O'Connell, Patrick. My first partner. A good cop who got too close to a truth someone powerful wanted buried. He died in a robbery gone wrong that I've never stopped believing was an execution. It's the file I pull out on nights when the rain is too loud and the bourbon isn't strong enough. It's the reason I see the gray in everything. My phone rang, a shrill cry against the quiet drumming of the rain. The call came just after midnight. The voice on the other end was a rookie, tense and trying too hard to sound professional. He didn't need to. The address he gave me was enough. Judge Alistair Monroe, a man whose name was carved into the very foundations of Viridia's legal system. A man who lived in a glass tower on the north side, a place so high above the city that the rain probably felt like an insult. Driving through the city at that hour is like navigating a ghost ship. The towering skyscrapers are dark monoliths, their windows like a million vacant eyes. The streets are empty, save for the occasional cab cutting through the downpour, its headlights slicing through the gloom. You see the real Viridia in these hours. The curated chaos of the day melts away, and all that's left is a skeleton of steel and shadows. I passed the university, a collection of old brick and stubborn ivy, and thought of my daughter, Sarah, a third-year law student, interning at the Innocence Project. She was full of fire and belief in the system I'd long since given up on. We hadn't spoken in 3 weeks. Our last conversation had been an argument about a case I'd closed, one she felt was unjust. It was a compromise, Dad, she'd said, her voice laced with disappointment. That's not justice. The silence between us was heavier than any unsolved case file. Monroe's penthouse was on the 40th floor. The elevator ride was a silent, sterile ascent into another world. The lobby was all marble and muted gold, the kind of place that made you feel poor just by breathing the air. My partner, Detective Valenti, was already there, waiting by the elevator doors. Valenti is a different breed. Young, sharp, ambitious. He moves with a restless energy, like a man constantly chasing something he can't quite catch. He sees the city in black and white, good guys and bad guys, winners and losers. I've tried to tell him about the gray, the vast, murky expanse where most of us live, but he's not ready to see it yet. He still believes you can wash the city clean. I just hope the city doesn't break him before he figures out you can't. Harding, he nodded, his jaw tight. It's a clean scene. Too clean. He wasn't wrong. The apartment was immaculate. Modern furniture, abstract art, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a god's eye view of the city sprawled below. It was less a home and more a showroom. And in the center of it all, slumped in a leather armchair, was Judge Monroe. He was dressed in a silk robe, a glass of what looked like scotch resting on the table beside him. There was no sign of a struggle, no forced entry, just a small, neat hole in his temple, a single drop of blood trailing down his cheek like a crimson tear. A professional hit, an execution. Door was locked from the inside, Valenti said, gesturing with his thumb. Electronic lock, high-tech security system. According to the building's logs, no one came in or out of this unit after Monroe arrived home at 7 p.m. The system was disarmed from his phone at 7:02, and never rearmed. I walked around the chair, my shoes silent on the plush rug. My gaze fell on the judge's desk. It was an organized landscape of legal pads, pens, and a laptop, closed. But one thing was out of place. A single, pristine white feather lay next to the Scotch glass. It was small, delicate, like something from a down pillow. "What do you make of this?" I asked, pointing to it. Valenti leaned in. "A feather? Forensics will bag it. Probably means nothing. Could have come from anywhere." I wasn't so sure. In my experience, things that mean nothing are the ones that end up meaning everything. The killer had taken the time to leave it. It wasn't a mistake, it was a statement. But what was it trying to say? I looked out the window. The rain traced frantic, jagged lines down the glass. Far below, the city lights shimmered, distorted by the water. It looked like a city drowning. From up here, you couldn't hear the sirens, the arguments, the quiet desperation. From up here, it was all just a beautiful, silent lie. Judge Monroe had lived in that lie. And now, he had died in it. The silence was the real crime scene. The next morning, the precinct was buzzing. The murder of a high-ranking judge was like blood in the water. Every cop wanted a piece of the action. Every journalist was sniffing for a lead. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and ambition. We were barely through the door when we were intercepted by Lieutenant Eva Ristova from Internal Affairs. Ristova moved with the quiet efficiency of a predator. She was all sharp angles and sharper eyes, and she had a reputation for finding cracks in even the most solid-looking armor. She and I had history. She'd led the investigation into my partner O'Connell's death, ruling it a random act despite my protest. She saw a loose cannon. I saw a cop who wouldn't let a politically convenient lie stand. "Detective Harding, Detective Valenti," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "Captain Harris has assigned me as an observer on this case, given the high-profile victim. I'll need copies of all your reports. Full transparency." It wasn't a request. Her eyes lingered on me a moment too long. This wasn't just observation, she was looking for a reason. Our captain, a political animal named Harris, confirmed it in his office. He looked like a man who'd been on the phone with the mayor all morning. "Ristova is a necessary evil," he grumbled. "Keep her happy. I want this solved yesterday." Monroe was a powerful man. He had friends, but he made enemies. I want a full list. Start with the obvious. The obvious was a woman named Eleanor Vance, a defense attorney famous for her scorched earth tactics in the courtroom. She was brilliant, ruthless, and had a reputation for dismantling witnesses on the stand. She'd gone up against Monroe's court dozens of times and their battles were legendary. We found her in her office, a chic, minimalist space that looked more like an art gallery than a law firm. She sat behind a glass desk, a picture of calm, calculated power. "Detective Harding, Detective Valenti," she said, her voice smooth as aged whiskey. "I was wondering when you'd pay me a visit. It's a tragedy. What happened to Alistair? A terrible, terrible tragedy." She didn't look like she thought it was a tragedy. She looked like she was analyzing a chess move. "You and the judge had a contentious relationship," Valenti started, jumping right in. Vance gave a small, humorless smile. "Alistair was a formidable opponent. We respected each other. Professional friction is not a motive for murder, detective." "Where were you last night, Ms. Vance?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "I was here, working late on the Thompson appeal. My staff can confirm. I left around 1 a.m. An alibi, but a soft one." I looked around her office. On a shelf behind her was a collection of glass awards and legal memorabilia, and a small, framed photo of her standing next to a man I recognized instantly, Marcus Thorne, an investigative journalist with a pit bull's reputation. "You know Marcus Thorne?" I asked, nodding towards the picture. Her composure flickered for a fraction of a second. "We're old friends. Is that a crime now, too?" We left with nothing but a denial and a potential connection. As we walked back to the car, Valenti was already convinced. "She's lying. You see the way she looked when you mentioned Thorne? She's involved." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe she's just a good lawyer. They get paid to lie with a straight face." Our next stop was Marcus Thorne's office at the Viridian Chronicle. It was the polar opposite of Vance's, a chaotic mess of stacked newspapers, overflowing ashtrays, and a corkboard on the wall that was a spiderweb of photos, notes, and connecting threads of red yarn. It was the office of a man obsessed. Thorne was hunched over his desk, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Detectives," he rasped, not looking up. "Let me guess. You want to talk about the good judge. We hear you were working on a story about him," I said. He finally looked up. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and deeply weary. "I'm always working on a story about someone. Men like Monroe don't get to where they are by being saints." I was digging into some of his old rulings, some curious investments. Nothing solid yet, just smoke. "But where there's smoke," Valenti prompted. Thorne shrugged. He was a product of the system. A system that's rotten from the inside out. He took a long drag from his cigarette. "You guys should know that better than anyone." His alibi was just as thin as Vance's. He was following a lead, alone, on the other side of town. No witnesses. He was a man who lived in the shadows, and the shadows made for a convenient excuse. Driving back to the precinct, the rain started again. I kept thinking about the feather. It was a detail that didn't fit. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my dark living room, a glass of bourbon in my hand, the city lights twinkling in the distance. I thought about the case, and I thought about Sarah. I finally sent her a text, "Be safe." A minute later, she replied, "You too, Dad." It was a ceasefire, not a truce, but it was something. My phone buzzed again. A text from Valenti. Another body. A city councilman, Robert Shapiro, found in his car in a deserted parking garage. A single, clean shot to the head. And on the dashboard, placed neatly next to the steering wheel, was another white feather. The pattern was clear now. This wasn't just about Judge Monroe. This was an attack on the city's justice system itself. Shapiro was a key figure on the city's Judiciary Committee. He and Monroe were two pillars of the same corrupt temple. And someone was trying to bring the whole thing crashing down. The pressure from Harris and Ristova became unbearable. Ristova, in particular, seemed to take a special interest in our every move, questioning our methods, our timelines, our instincts. It felt less like observation and more like a hunt. That's when District Attorney Julian Croft called his first press conference. I watched it on the small TV in the break room. Croft stood at the podium, a figure of absolute confidence and righteous anger. He was handsome, charismatic, with a voice that could command a room or soothe a nervous jury. He was everything Viridia wanted in a hero. "These are not random acts of violence," he declared, his voice ringing with authority. "These are cowardly attacks on the very heart of our city, on our institutions, on justice itself. Let me be clear. We will not be intimidated. We will not rest. We will hunt down this monster, and we will bring him to the light." He was magnificent. Later that day, he called Valenti and me to his office. The DA's office was like a cathedral of law. Grand, imposing, with mahogany walls and ceilings so high they seemed to touch the heavens. "Detectives," he said, his expression grave. "I want you to know you have my full support. Anything you need, any warrant, any resource, it's yours. We are in this together." He was helpful, pointing us towards Vance's more notorious clients and hinting that Thorne's journalistic methods weren't always clean. He also steered us toward a new name, Silas Blackwood, a construction magnate with a reputation as sharp and jagged as broken glass. Blackwood's companies got a lot of city contracts, thanks to Shapiro's committee, Croft noted casually, and Monroe had a habit of ruling in his favor. Might be a loose end Blackwood wanted to tie up. At the time, I was grateful. I didn't realize he was steering us straight into a fog. Our investigation into Blackwood led us into a different Viridia, one of union halls that smelled of beer and desperation, and construction sites that hummed with quiet menace. Blackwood operated from an office that was the opposite of Monroe's penthouse. It was grounded, brutalist concrete, a fortress in the industrial heart of the city. He was a big man with hands like cinder blocks and eyes that missed nothing. "Detectives," he rumbled, leaning back in his chair. "You're wasting your time. Shapiro and Monroe were good for business. Why would I kill the geese laying my golden eggs?" He had an alibi, of course. A poker game with men whose names you didn't question. He was a dead end, but a heavy one. He felt like the kind of man who could make judges and councilmen disappear. The next few days were a blur of dead ends. The tension between me and Valenti started to fray. One night, working late, I was reviewing the security footage from the parking garage where Shapiro was killed. The quality was terrible, but I saw something. A figure, deep in the background, walking away. The figure was tall, wearing a long coat, and they had a limp. A slight limp in their left leg. The next morning, I watched Valenti walk across the squad room. He had a slight limp in his left leg, a remnant of an old injury from a chase that went bad years ago. My blood ran cold. It couldn't be Valenti? The thought was a poison. It seeped into everything. I started my own secret investigation. I pulled his financials. Nothing unusual. I checked his phone records. He was making a lot of late-night calls to a burner phone. I decided to tail him after work. He drove to a rundown part of town, to a grimy bar called the Crow's Nest. He went inside. I waited. An hour later, he came out with a known informant, a bottom feeder named Jimmy the Weasel Gallo. It could be part of his off-the-books investigation, or it could be something else entirely. Ristova's ever-present scrutiny made me paranoid. Was she watching me watch him? I decided to confront him. I waited until the end of our shift, when the squad room was nearly empty. "We need to talk, Valenti," I said. "What's up, old man?" he asked, not looking up from his report. The Shapiro footage. The figure walking away had a limp, just like yours. And the burner phone. The meetings at the Crow's Nest. What's going on? His friendly demeanor vanished. He stood up slowly, his eyes hard. "You've been following me?" For a second, I thought he was going to come at me. My hand instinctively moved towards my weapon. Then, he deflated. "Damn it, Harding," he sighed. "I think there's a mole in the department. Someone is feeding information to our killer. I didn't tell you because I didn't know who to trust. Not even you. The burner is for an old informant. I'm trying to get ahead of the leak." The relief was quickly replaced by a new, creeping dread. The leak was real. The next bombshell came from Marcus Thorne. He published a front-page article in the Chronicle with details about the white feather, a detail that had been rigorously withheld. We hauled Thorne downtown. In the interrogation room, he finally cracked. "It's an anonymous source," he whispered. "They feed me information through a dead drop. They told me if I ever stopped printing what they sent, or if I ever talked to the cops, I'd be next." He was a pawn. I went home that night and woke up to another call. Eleanor Vance. Her voice was tight with panic. "Someone tried to break into my office last night. I met her at a 24-hour diner. She was huddled in a booth, looking scared. They weren't after money," she said. "They were after a file. The Thompson appeal." She explained that her client, Thompson, an accountant, had stumbled onto a massive bribery scheme. Money from Silas Blackwood's construction contracts funneled into a slush fund that financed campaigns for city officials, including Shapiro. The fund was administered by a company owned by Judge Monroe's wife. "Why didn't you come to us sooner?" I asked. "Because I don't know who to trust. The people involved own the police. They own the courts. Thompson has gone into hiding. They know I have the files. The killer knows." She was right to be scared. The killer wasn't just eliminating co-conspirators, he was cleaning up loose ends. It was all starting to click into place. But one thing still bothered me. The white feather. It was personal, theatrical. It didn't fit with a mob boss like Blackwood. Then came the third body. This one was different. No clean shot. No high-ranking official. It was a retired beat cop named Miller. Found in his own home. A messy, violent scene. Stabbed. And on the wall, scrawled in the victim's blood, were two words: "Ask Finch." Miller was the arresting officer in the Thomas Finch case, 15 years ago. This wasn't the clean, professional work of the first two murders. This was angry. This was personal. This new murder threw the entire investigation into chaos. Harris was screaming. Croft was demanding answers. And Ristova was practically living in my back pocket. The Mo was completely different. We had two killers. One was a ghost, a professional. The other was a butcher. I found myself at a dead end, with too many theories and not enough facts. That weekend, needing a break, I met Sarah for that dinner. It was tense at first. We talked around the edges of our lives. Then, she brought up her work. We're looking at an old case, she said, stirring her iced tea. Man named Thomas Finch, railroaded 15 years ago for a robbery homicide he couldn't have committed. The conviction was secured by a coerced eyewitness. It's a real mess. The name hit me like a physical blow. Finch, what was the evidence? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Barely anything, she said, her passion flaring up. But the prosecutor was a rising star who needed a big win. A guy you probably know, Julian Croft. I drove home that night with the windows down, the cold night air doing nothing to stop the buzzing in my head. Finch, a type of bird. The feather. It wasn't just a signature, it was a name. The professional killings weren't about the bribery scheme. That was a smokescreen. They were about Thomas Finch. This was about Julian Croft. And the bloody message at the Miller crime scene. That was a son, trying to scream his father's name. I checked the old files. Thomas Finch had a son, Leo, supposedly died in a car crash 5 years ago. I pulled the accident report. It was thin, signed off by a coroner who retired abruptly a week later. The body was cremated. Too neat, too clean. Leo Finch wasn't dead. He was our butcher. I pulled the O'Connell file as soon as I got home. My partner had been looking into rumors of a prosecutor coercing witnesses. He never told me who. He was killed before he could. The dates matched. O'Connell had been murdered 1 week before the Finch trial concluded. The next day, I didn't tell Valenti what I knew. Not yet. I told him I was chasing a cold case. I drove 3 hours out of the city to a decaying suburb to find a man named Henderson, the eyewitness from the Finch trial. He was a ghost, living in a small, cluttered house that smelled of fear and cheap whiskey. I don't talk about that, he stammered when I showed him my badge. You recanted your testimony, I said, my voice gentle. You said you were coerced. He started to weep, his whole body shaking. He threatened my family. He said he'd put my son away for a drug charge, make it stick. He said he owned the judge, the cops, everyone. He said if I ever talked, I'd disappear. Who? Henderson. Who threatened you? The prosecutor, he whispered. Croft. I left him my card, but I knew he'd never call. On the drive back, I got a call from Valenti. His voice was grim. Harding, you need to see this. He sent me an address. A cheap motel on the edge of the city. The room was a mess, and in the middle of it, on the floor, was Jimmy the Weasel Gallo, Valenti's informant. A single shot to the head. And on the nightstand, a white feather. It was a message. For Valenti. For me. The killer knew about the mole hunt. The leak was inside our own investigation. And then, the pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. The leak, the manipulation of the media, the murders, the timing, it all pointed to one man. The man orchestrating the investigation itself. The person who killed Monroe and Shapiro wasn't avenging Thomas Finch. He was silencing them. Because Monroe, riddled with guilt, was about to confess his role in the Finch case to Marcus Thorne. And Croft, using the mole inside the department, found out. He killed Monroe, then Shapiro. He used the Finch feather as a brilliant piece of misdirection, framing a dead man's ghost for his own crimes. He fed Thorne information to control the narrative. He killed Gallo to frame Valenti, to sow chaos. And O'Connell. O'Connell died because he got too close to the original sin. Leo Finch, the grieving son, was just a convenient complication, a ghost to pin the blame on. But who was the mole? It had to be someone with access to everything. My mind raced. There was only one person who fit. Ristova. She hadn't been observing. She'd been running interference for Croft. Her investigation into O'Connell's death was a cover-up. Her presence on our case was to ensure we never looked in the right direction. I pulled her file. She had a commendation early in her career for a drug bust that went sideways. Her partner was shot. The official story was that he was a hero. The unofficial story was that he was dirty, and she covered for him. The prosecutor who signed off on the internal investigation, burying it. A young, ambitious Julian Croft. He owned her. I drove back to the city, my mind reeling. I didn't go to the precinct. I couldn't trust anyone. I went straight to the source. I walked into the grand lobby of the district attorney's office, my coat dripping water onto the polished marble floors. His secretary tried to stop me, but I walked right past her and pushed open the heavy mahogany doors to his office. He was standing by the window, looking down at the city as a storm raged. "Detective Harding," he said, his voice calm. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I know about Thomas Finch," I said. "And Patrick O'Connell." He turned around slowly. There was no surprise on his face, no fear, only a kind of weary resignation. "Ah," he said softly. "I knew you were good, detective. I just didn't think you were that good." He gestured for me to take a seat. "It wasn't a confession. It was an invitation. It was my first big case," he began. "Finch was a career criminal. He was guilty, maybe not of that specific crime, but of 100 others. The witness was shaky. The evidence was thin. I embellished. I did what was necessary to ensure justice was served. You framed an innocent man," I said, my voice flat. "And you had my partner killed." He smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "There are no innocent men, detective. Not in this city." O'Connell was a threat to the greater good. That conviction made my career. It gave me the power to do real good. Was the sacrifice of one worthless life, and one meddling cop, too high a price to pay for that? Monroe was going to talk, wasn't he? Alistair got old, sentimental, Croft sighed. He was a liability, a loose end from a past that needed to stay buried. "And the feathers?" I asked. "Poetry," he said with a shrug. "A little misdirection. A grieving family member." It was the perfect narrative to hide the real one. Simple, boring self-preservation. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. They were not the eyes of a madman. They were the eyes of a true believer. "You have no proof, detective. It's my word against the ghost of a dead convict. Who do you think this city will believe?" He was right. I had nothing. No weapon. No DNA. No witnesses. Just a story. "But you and I," he continued, his voice a near whisper, "we understand each other. We know that sometimes, you have to get your hands dirty to keep it clean. Join me, Harding. We could truly save this city." I looked at him, at this man who had become the very disease he claimed to be curing. I stood up. "There's a difference between getting your hands dirty and drowning in the filth, Croft." I turned and walked to the door. "You're making a mistake, Harding," he called after me. "You're choosing the chaos." I paused at the door and looked back at him. The flashes of lightning illuminated his face, a mask of serene confidence. "No," I said. "I'm just turning on the lights." I walked out of his office. Valenti and a dozen uniformed officers were waiting for me in the hall. Before I went to see Croft, I had made one last call. I sent Valenti everything. The connection to O'Connell, the testimony from Henderson, the file on Ristova, the whole sordid story. It wasn't enough for a conviction, but it was enough to light a fire. As they went in past me, I saw Ristova standing at the far end of the hall. Our eyes met. There was no triumph in her gaze, no defeat, just the cold, hard resignation of a soldier on a losing side. She knew it was over. I didn't stay to watch. I walked out of the building and into the rain. The storm was breaking. They won't convict him. Not right away. A man like Croft doesn't fall easily. He might even walk. But the story is out now. The secret is in the light. And in a city like Viridia, sometimes that's the only justice you get. I stood on the courthouse steps, the cool rain on my face washing away. Nothing. The sins were still there. They were just visible now. My phone buzzed. It was Sarah. I read the news feeds. "I'm proud of you, Dad." "I'm proud of you, too," I texted back. "Dinner this week is on me." "I'd like that," she replied. The city's heartbeat, that slow, steady rhythm, continued all around me. A new rhythm was starting, too. The rhythm of a story being told, of a truth clawing its way out of the silence. It wasn't a happy ending. There are no happy endings in Viridia. But it was an ending. And in the gray, murky expanse where I live, sometimes that has to be enough.